Yes, just going back over that, my early sort of personal involvement in tourism studies, what I liked about it was that academic life, I think, is to be enjoyed, and the study of tourism, the academic study of tourism, gave me that opportunity to do other things. And so in the 1990s, while we were producing these edited books on tourism in Southeast Asia, I also started to compile. I'm very enthusiastic about travel writing. And so I started to compile a travel book on Borneo, which is probably my bestseller.
Oh yeah, okay, I see.
I mean, you know, academic books don't generally sell that many copies. But this went into, I think, about 4th or 5th edition.
I see.
And the Best of Borneo Travel, it's called.
Right, okay.
And it was pretty successful. And then some 7-8 years later, Oxford University Press, who published it from Kuala Lumpur, said, do a sequel. So, more Borneo Travel.
Okay.
It was called Moving Pictures, More Borneo Travel.
Oh, okay.
So that came out. And then a publisher, I think it was called Global Books, got hold of this and said, we want a general book on Malaysian customs and etiquette.
Okay.
Can you do maybe 80 pages telling us the do's and don'ts? You know, you're a tourist, you arrive in Malaysia. What should you do and what shouldn't you do? And so I wrote a little book on that. And then that came out in several editions as well in about 2007, 2008. And then The Best of Borneo Travel was then translated into Indonesian as Kalimantan Tempo Dulu, which I gather is also selling very well.
Oh, okay.
So that's my,
wow,
I mean, not only is the academic study of tourism a kind of sideline for me, because I'm doing lots of other things, but then I've got this other sideline in doing all this kind of
So when is the Victor T. King Guide to Southeast Asia coming out? That's the next one, I think.
I don't think I can compete with Lonely Planet. So that's a really nice part of doing this. And, you know, so you get your name known by various publishers who are obviously interested in other things. They don't want an academic book; they want something more popular. This is what I've been doing.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. Is this whole world of tourism, and especially with heritage as it connects to it, mixes together the academic and the non-academic, which is probably seen nowhere more clearly than something you talk about in your recent article, which is about the space of these heritage sites. Because when UNESCO designates a place a World Heritage Site, correct me if I'm wrong, but they actually designate the space, right?
They draw boundaries around.
But then there's space outside those boundaries, and that's something you've been investigating, right?
Well, yes, more recently, but I owe a lot of this to Adele Esposito, who her major work, her PhD. She was at Paris Belleville, University of Paris, but the School of Architecture.
I see.
There, and studied Angkor as well as its relationship to Siem Reap, the major tourist hub, the gateway to these wonderful monumental sites in Angkor. And so she, in effect, coined this term non-heritage space, that once UNESCO inscribes a site, they obviously have to draw boundaries around it. Heritage has to be protected and conserved. How do you do that? Well, you set certain restrictions on that site. I mean, particularly monumental sites, which are generally fragile and so on, have to be protected. But then what happens to the space outside that, which is it's not recognized globally by UNESCO, but clearly it is important because it's connected to the site. And she was looking at what happens there, which indeed in Siem Reap and so on has heritage, but it's not recognized by
Right.
UNESCO in any kind of global terms.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's marginalized. And what then happens? What usually happens is that because these places, you can look at Khao Yai National Park in Thailand as well, about 2 hours drive northeast of central Bangkok, and the same thing is happening there. You have a designated national park with boundaries around it, but beyond that is the non-heritage space, where you've got massive tourist-related development.
I see.
And the gateway to that national park, and a road runs through it as well, is full of hotels, restaurants, bars.
Right.
They've got vineyards there as well. People have brought from Bangkok for wine tasting and so on and so forth. So it happens there. It happens it's happened in Malacca as well, where there's a lot of development on reclaimed land. So the astonishing thing I feel about Malacca is that when you look at the historic core of Malacca, where the old Muslim Sultanate was, much of the coastline came up more or less up against St. Paul's, now called St. Paul's Hill, or Bukit Malacca. Now that's all reclaimed land, and on that land is shopping malls and again hotels and restaurants, urban development and so on, which in a sense almost completely surrounds the historic core of Malacca. So the interest is not just in the heritage site itself, which is where most of the attention has been devoted, but what happens outside that space in what is not necessarily uncontrolled development, but it's more relaxed. The regulations obviously are not so strict as those that are imposed by UNESCO. Having said that, the problem that UNESCO faces is that it wants a state party, so-called, or the nation state, the country that has a particular World Heritage Site. It wants them to devise, of course, a management plan, and of course that's part of the process of being recognised and being inscribed, and that there's an annual review of those management plans and so on to see how things are being implemented and what's going right and what's going wrong. But the problem, I say, that UNESCO faces is that this is administered by the authorities within that country, government authorities, usually museum personnel, conservationists and others within the state. And so there's only so much that UNESCO can do. If there are certain things going wrong, it's very difficult for them to impose sanctions. The sanction that they can impose is put that site, if they're very unhappy with what's going on there, on a World Heritage in Danger list. And that's happened to some, now I think there's about 50 or so UNESCO World Heritage sites that are in that category. The only one in Southeast Asia is Sumatra, the rainforest areas of Sumatra. And that was put on, well, fairly recently, and it still remains on the list. And I think at the moment, because we know what's happening in Sumatra in relation to forest clearance and certainly encroachment in the national park areas, the UNESCO site areas, that probably it's unlikely it's going to be taken off for a little while yet. The only two other sites that have been in Southeast Asia that have been placed on the World Heritage List were Angkor, and that was immediately placed on, when it was inscribed in 1992, it was immediately placed on the danger list because so much conservation work had to be done. But then a decade later it was taken off, it's no longer on the danger list. The only other one are the rice terraces, the Ifugao rice terraces in northern Luzon in the Philippines. And that was put on for a period, and because of the great efforts of NGOs and conservationists in the Philippines, really in alliance with local people and so on, the problems that those rice terraces were experiencing were more or less solved to the satisfaction of UNESCO, and it was taken off the list. The absolute sanction is to simply remove the site.
The designation?
The designation entirely. A kind of blacklist, if you like. And that's only happened in the whole history of UNESCO in two sites, one in Oman, and the other in Germany. Now that's a really drastic measure that UNESCO will take to remove a site, and they try to clearly they try to avoid it as much as possible, because you know, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee and the whole operation of global heritage under the auspices of UNESCO are managed and organised by state parties, by the constituent nation states.
Right.
And you don't really want to get into difficulty with particular nation states quarrelling over what they're doing or not doing in relation to a site. But you take some of the Middle Eastern countries, those in danger are mainly Africa and the Middle East, for obvious reasons, you know, where you have conflicts and so on, where you have a degree of poverty, of development problems. Then some of these sites, if they're natural sites, say national parks, may well be encroached upon and so on. There'll be poaching of animals and so on that are protected. And then in the Middle East, of course, Syria being one of the best examples of that, but also Iraq. The sites are, you know, a part of a military conflict and are being destroyed. Now they're on a danger list, but ultimately I think some of them will probably never be resurrected or you know, restored to their previous condition. So it may be that those are very much under doubt in the, I think probably in the short to medium term.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, I think it's a fascinating subject. I mean, we now UNESCO now has, it had its last meeting in Bahrain this June, July, and every year it will inscribe new sites. Right. So now it's brought up to 1,092 World Heritage sites. Right. I suppose we're all interested in league tables. The country that has the most sites is Italy. Oh,
of course, yeah, that makes sense.
55, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But there are others. Spain is up there as well. Okay. France, Germany, China.
Oh, yeah, okay.
UK is 8th.
I see. Okay.
My own country.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just take a break right here and continue in a second. Okay.